Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde in the sign of Taurus early Friday morning on April 21st, 2023. And in this video, I'm going to be covering everything that you need to know about this Mercury retrograde because there's a lot that's happening inside the Mercury retrograde and afterwards that you're going to want to know. Hello, my name is Cam White, if you don't know me already. In this video, we're going to be covering Mercury ingressing into shadow, Mercury stationing retrograde, the eclipse that's happening in between, and what's following after, which is going to be Jupiter ingressing into Taurus. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to be making a video about Jupiter and Taurus and you don't want to miss it. But this Mercury retrograde essentially brings in this Jupiter and Taurus energy, which is going to be really good. It's really exciting. So let's go ahead and get started. So yes, Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde early Friday morning on April 21st, 2023. But before that happens, if you're not already familiar with a Mercury retrograde cycle, there's three phases of the Mercury retrograde cycle. There's Mercury ingressing into shadow, which means Mercury will hit the same exact degree that it will come back to after it's done being retrograde. Then there's the actual Mercury retrograde, where Mercury pretty much starts to move backwards. It doesn't technically move backwards, it's just an optical illusion. But what a Mercury retrograde is when Mercury goes between the sun and the earth. And so because of that, here on earth, it appears as if it's moving backwards. And then there's the third phase, and that's when Mercury stations direct at that same degree it entered shadow at, and then it will move forward and continue to move in shadow until it's finally free of its shadow phase. So Mercury enters shadow later in the afternoon on April 6th, 2023. And why this is important is you want to look at your chart and see if there's any significant planets between 5 degrees and 15 degrees of Taurus. If you have any planets in that area, this Mercury retrograde will be affecting you even more. But what's important about the Mercury shadow phase is this is the day that you will see a lot of the themes and the events that the Mercury retrograde will kind of deal with start to appear. And right as and right before Mercury actually enters shadow is going to be conjoining something called the North Node, or in other words, Rahu. If you're not familiar with the nodes are essentially invisible points in the sky that represent where the eclipses are at any given time during the year. Now, you can look up a bunch of stuff on the nodes. They're really, really important. A lot of people put a lot of emphasis to them, and that's for good reason. They're very, very important. But there's a big difference between the North Node and the South Node. The North Node is this little squiggly line, and the North Node represents where the eclipses are happening on the northern part of the ecliptic. So the ecliptic is a 23-degree space in the sky where all of the zodiac signs lay on. And because it's 23 degrees, there's quite a bit of space in between. Now, the eclipses happen on both the top part of this ecliptic and the bottom part of the ecliptic, but the North Node represents where it is on the top part of the ecliptic. The North Node is symbolic of like hunger and desire and this absolute inner urge to pursue a certain direction. Since January of 2022, the North Node has been in the zodiac sign of Taurus. Taurus represents, value, security, stability, nourishment. It's ruled by the planet Venus, and Venus is all about love and indulgence and fruitfulness. And think about Taurus, and think about Taurus season, right? Here in Denver, Colorado, this is right when all of the flowers start to bloom. It starts to warm up a bit. And Taurus season was symbolic of there being fruitfulness and plentiness and this kind of peace after the winter. Taurus is a fixed sign, and it represents the fixed season of spring where everything is growing. Everything is coming out of, hibernation. Everything's coming out of winter, and spring is finally here. And that's important to remember for understanding what the sign of Taurus actually represents. And so coming back to Mercury and the North Node's been in Taurus for a long time. So we've had this urge and this desire to, create more value, to create more security, to create more stability. But Mercury is all about communication, logic, thinking, rationale, making plans. And so as Mercury goes into Taurus, our mindset and the way that we communicate and the way that we're organizing ourselves is really focused on, value, security, stability, fruitfulness, abundance. And abundance is kind of a overused term, I feel, as if in the astrology spiritual world. But Taurus definitely has some implications of that. But as Mercury goes through Taurus, our mindset is really fixed on, okay, like, where do I need to get more security? Where do I need to get more stability? How can I make this more pleasant? How can I make this more fun and enjoyable? And when Mercury enters shadow, again, that's going to be on April 6th, Mercury will be pretty much on top of the North Node. And so there's going to be this overwhelming urge and this hunger to be like, where do I need, like, how do I need to plan myself? How do I need to communicate? What do I need to think about that's going to create this, lifestyle, or create what it is I want around me? And make sure you stick around to the end of this video, because at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking about how exactly this Mercury retrograde is going to be affecting each one of the zodiac signs. So it'll make a little bit more sense once you go to that part. However, as Mercury enters shadow on April 6th, there's something that's going to be either communicated to you on that day, or that you're going to communicate to someone else, or some kind of information or some kind of message is given to you, or some kind of plan is starting to get a little bit more dialed in on that day that will become very important as Mercury moves forward. Then we get to the second part of Mercury retrograde, and that's when Mercury actually stations retrograde. Again, this is happening early Friday morning on April 21st, 2023. And this is significant because it will be almost conjoining the planet of Uranus. Now, Uranus, which rules instability, sudden impulse of insight, it rules, revolutions, it rules kind of sporadic moments, it destabilizes things, but it's also a planet that represents breakthroughs. It's very erratic. And Uranus has been in the sign of Taurus since around the beginning of 2018. And what's important about this is Uranus takes about 7 years to go through a zodiac sign. So look at your birth chart and look at where Taurus rules your chart. Look at what house it rules in your chart. And wherever Uranus has been, you've maybe doing some experimenting, or there's been some instability, or there's been some back and forth, or maybe even some breakthrough moments in that area. Now, as Mercury goes retrograde, it won't exactly be conjoining Uranus, but it's really, really close. And I think there's something to say about that. Again, with Uranus ruling instability and, kind of chaos and things all over the place, Mercury stationing retrograde next to it is going to bring a little bit of that energy to it. Now, Mercury retrogrades are typically times to rethink, to review, to reorganize, to go back on, and to trace your steps over. However, as Mercury stations retrograde on top of Uranus, this might be kind of a chaotic having to go backwards, a chaotic or something being very disruptive, or plans going a little bit awry to where you have to work yourself back and, backtrack your steps essentially to reorganize yourself. Mercury retrogrades also represent miscommunications and misunderstandings. So if someone's telling you something when Mercury enters shadow, take it with a grain of salt, because those plans might change over the coming weeks. So as Mercury goes retrograde, there will be this time for about 2 to 3 weeks where we're reviewing this area of our lives. We're reflecting on this area of our lives. We're rethinking the way that this area of our lives is significant, or how we operate in it. So again, Mercury goes retrograde, plans kind of dissolve, plans kind of go a little awry, and all of a sudden there's sudden change, there's sudden reversal, and all of a sudden we're rethinking and reviewing and reorganizing ourselves. And there's one other part of the Mercury retrograde I left out, and that is the halfway point of a Mercury retrograde, and that is what we call the Mercury cazimi. Now, a cazimi is pretty much when a planet conjoins the sun. However, there are two different types of cazimis when we're speaking about Mercury. Mercury's halfway point of a retrograde is when it conjoins the sun. And from a astronomical point of view, this is the time where Mercury pretty much goes in between the sun and the earth, Mercury, and the sun all completely align. The way that this is described is like being the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde is like sudden clarity, right? If Mercury is our thoughts and our rationale and, how we're communicating, it's retrograde. We might be a little bit confused. Our thoughts might be a little bit scattered. We're rethinking an area of our lives. This is like a sudden insight of clarity. This is a sudden insight of, oh, this is what went wrong. Oh, this is what was miscommunicated. Or, oh, this is how I can fix my plans. Or, oh, this is what I need to change and do differently. So this Mercury cazimi on May 1st, expect that to be a time where all of a sudden everything starts coming together and things start making a little bit more sense. But then we get to May 5th, 2023, and this is when we have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. Now, eclipses are really, really big deals in astrology and through ancient history, and they represent this sort of emergency event. This, all of a sudden, all of your attention gets focused in one direction. And as you might have remembered from what I just spoke about earlier, the nodes, which represent the eclipses, have been in Scorpio and Taurus since January of 2022. Now, the north node has been in Taurus, but the south node has been in Scorpio because they're opposite signs. This is technically the last eclipse that we have in the sign of Scorpio and Taurus. And I want you to think about what was going on in your life around May of 2022 and November of 2022. because those were the last 2 times that we had eclipses here. And look at your chart. Where is Taurus and Scorpio? What houses do those rule? And what emergency type events or sudden doors opening or sudden doors closing happened in your life during those times? With this being the last lunar eclipse in Scorpio, with the South Node being here, this is one last purge. This is one last drain. This is one kind of like, if Taurus is about, beauty and abundance and fruitfulness, it's the middle of spring, everything's growing, right? Scorpio's the opposite. It's the middle of fall. Everything is dying. Everything is decaying. Everybody's, or at least a lot of the animals that hibernate, are going away to hibernate at this time. And so the way I look at this axis of Taurus and Scorpio is like, if you want the abundance and the beauty, sometimes you have to deal with the death and the decay and the purging of things. And so this eclipse happens in the middle of this Mercury retrograde. And this is where I want to put a little bit of context here. Mercury going retrograde in Taurus is us rethinking, our values, our security, beauty and what we enjoy and what we get pleasure from. But in order to get to that, sometimes we have to purge the old out. Sometimes we have to get the gunk out of our systems, right? If you're eating like crap or if you're not getting sunlight, your face and your skin is not going to look good. And if you want that good looking skin, and if you want to be healthy, sometimes you have to purge out the bad stuff. So this purge essentially happens in the middle of the Mercury retrograde, which I think is really awesome because this Mercury retrograde allows us to really redo this area and kind of clean house. And this is that one final purge and release of everything. And what's important about this too, again, and I'll be talking about this in just a second, is Mercury is pretty much getting the zodiac sign of Taurus ready to go for Jupiter to ingress into Taurus. And like I said before, if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video, because in May, Jupiter is going to be ingressing into Taurus. Then the third part of the Mercury retrograde is going to be on May 14th, 2023. Very late in the evening, Mercury is going to be stationing direct. And this is where it's like, all right, we made these plans, or this is what I communicated, and we started to move forward, but then it kind of got changed. It kind of got switched up. We did things a little bit differently, but now that all of that chaos is somewhat handled, now we can start to move forward. Now my line of thinking is clear. Now the communication is clear, and we can start to, do what we were doing, but this time with, all of our T's crossed and our I's dotted. And what's important about this Mercury retrograde too is that Mercury is going to be in the zodiac sign of Taurus for the next 2 months. So it ingressed into Taurus very early April, and it won't leave Taurus until about June. So that means we have about 2 months of just really keeping our minds and our thoughts occupied in this area of our lives. And I think by this time, it's like, all right, there's a lot more clarity. There's a lot more sense of, stability, and a lot more of our values are in focus. A lot more of what we want is in focus. But then 2 days later, after Mercury stations direct, Jupiter will be ingressing into Taurus. And this is so important because Jupiter is all about abundance, faith, opportunity, expanding and giving. And Jupiter is a pretty awesome planet. Like, if you know a little bit about astrology, you should be on Team Jupiter at this point. But Jupiter is going to be going into the sign of Taurus, where it will be for the next year. It won't leave Taurus until about May or June 2024. And so Jupiter is going to be ingressing into Taurus. And make sure you look at your birth chart, because wherever Jupiter is going into, Jupiter is going to expand that house. Jupiter is going to put a lot of focus on that house for you. Jupiter is going to bring abundance here. Jupiter is going to bring a lot of faith. Jupiter is going to bring a lot of great opportunities in this area, which we'll be discussing later on in the video. But it's so interesting to me that Mercury, kind of retrogrades in this area, right? Where the way I imagine it is, if you have a guest coming over and they're on their way, this is like getting your house cleaned up and ready to go. So, in case your house is dirty or your space is kind of messy, you don't want your guests to think that it's messy, right? You want to have a good impression. So Mercury retrograding in Taurus is like getting this whole house or this area of your life ready to go for Jupiter to come in, where Jupiter is going to expand, Jupiter is going to increase, Jupiter is going to bring opportunities and abundance in this area of your life. And again, that's a whole year-long transit. So we have a whole year to really, gain abundance, enjoy the fruit of our labor, and we'll be talking about a little bit more of that as we go into what it means for your zodiac sign. And then we get to pretty much the final part of the third part of the Mercury retrograde, and that's on May 31st when Mercury actually leaves shadow. So again, from the beginning of April all the way until the very end of May, we're dealing with one thing in our lives. Like, Mercury is only in one part of the sky, and now that we get to May 31st, all of that is wrapped up and we could start to move forward into new territory, and we could start thinking about other things and pretty much moving on with our lives. So let's talk about how this is going to be affecting the zodiac signs. Now, I didn't mention this on my last video about Saturn and Pisces, so make sure you watch that if you haven't already. But I got a lot of flack for not talking about, is this about your rising sign or your sun sign? Every single time an astrologer speaks about your zodiac sign, whether they know this or not, they're speaking about your rising sign. And that's because in the birth chart, you are represented by the rising sign. I have 2 whole videos about this you could check out at the links here or in the description below. But essentially, in your birth chart, not everything in your life is about you. Not everything in your birth chart is about you. But the thing that represents you specifically is the rising sign. And if an astrologer is talking about sun sign horoscopes, they are essentially putting your sun sign as the ascendant to look at where everything is affecting your life, or where all the transits are at, like in your chart regarding your sun sign. So you can watch this from your sun sign if you want. No one's going to arrest you, but this is from the perspective of rising signs. Aries. This Mercury retrograde is happening in your 2nd house of money. So there is going to be a delay or miscommunication or a miscalculation regarding money, finances, resources, and possessions. This might look like a big purchase. This might look like, money kind of getting a little like haggled by like the banks or something like that. But this is you getting your money ready to go for Jupiter to come into your 2nd house, and it's going to be increasing your money. It's going to be increasing abundance. You might be buying even more things. So all of this looks really good for the Aries risings. It's mostly about money and reorganizing your money. But with the eclipse in the middle, there might be some expenses that you have to pay or some debts that you have to pay off in order to kind of get all of that going. Taurus, this one's a really big one for you guys because this is happening in your 1st house. The 1st house represents the body, the self, the image, how you perceive the world. And as Mercury retrogrades in your 1st house, it's really interesting. Like a few things could happen. One is you're probably going to miscommunicate something, or you might have an idea in your head about who you are or how you see the world, and that might significantly change. But Mercury retrograding in your 1st house is like reorganizing the way that you see yourself, rethinking the way that you see yourself, reviewing who you are. And with these eclipses that have been happening in your 1st house for quite some time, there's been a big focus on you and your body and your image and where you're going in your life and your health. And then as Jupiter ingresses into your 1st house, be careful if you don't want to gain weight. Jupiter expands. It's going into your 1st house of body. It'll be really easy to gain weight. But this will be this kind of increase in yourself, like increase in what's the word I'm looking for here? Optimism. That's the word I'm looking for here. Like just seeing things a lot clearer and seeing things in a lot more optimistic way, which I think is really positive for you guys. However, there is one more eclipse in your 7th house of relationships. So this might bring some instability within the relationship for you guys if you are in a relationship, or if you're not in a relationship or you're ready to get single. This eclipse that's happening in your 7th house is a really opportunistic time for that. Gemini, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 12th house. The 12th house is interesting because it rules like hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, withdrawal, like hiding away from the world. It rules self-sabotage too. And Mercury is your ruling planet, which is really important because whatever Mercury's doing, you're essentially doing. And so as it's retrograding in your 12th house, I think a lot of this is going to be like, where do you need to carve more, time alone? Where do you need to have more space alone? Do you need a private space in your home that maybe you don't get all the time? This might even be, self-sabotage, stepping on your own foot and getting in your own way. So, try to pay attention to make sure that doesn't really happen, or if it does happen, that it's not the end of the fucking world. But this Mercury retrograde will be a little bit annoying. But what's nice is that Jupiter goes into your 12th house after this, where Jupiter rules your 7th house of relationships and your 10th house of career. And although there might be some difficulties that come up from that over this next year, Jupiter is expanding your 12th house. We're really going deep into your subconscious and deep into your like hidden fears and why you get in your own way. So a lot of this is like re-examining your inner mental state. Like the 12th house also rules the subconscious. So like there's just this reorganizing and looking in the back of your head and just kind of going like, where do I get in my own way? Is this what I really want? Do I need to spend more time alone? And those kind of things. Cancer, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 11th house of friends. This one's super simple. probably going to have a miscommunication with a friend, or you might say something and change your plans, or a friend might change their plans on you. This might be a reorganization of your friendships and your networks and your community, which is good because Jupiter's about to come into this area, and Jupiter's about to expand your 11th house of friends. So you will be making more friends. You will have more opportunities to meet people and to socialize in a network. But this Mercury retrograde is kind of like reorganizing the way that you see friends and society and networking and socializing and things like that. Now, with the eclipse in the 5th house, you might be changing, like this eclipse in Scorpio I'm talking about, you might be kind of changing what it is you organize yourself around. Like, if all of your friends are just people you go out and drink and party with, it's like maybe you need more friends that do other better things, or vice versa. But a lot of this is reorganizing your friendships and really looking at like, who's your friend, who's your enemy? Do you need to get rid of some friends? And then once you kind of deal with this, there's a lot more room to expand for new friendships. Leo, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 10th house of career. Like I said in my Leo Rising 2023 overview, this is the best year for you guys. And as Mercury goes retrograde in your 10th, there's probably going to be some miscommunications around money and finances related to your work and your career. This also might just be like, maybe you got a new job, or you're moving, or you're being promoted. There might be this like looking at your job and your work and kind of reorienting yourself. Like if it's your first time in a new job, this might be a time of like learning the right steps, or, as you're kind of learning, maybe you mess something up and something changes and you kind of have to work backwards a little bit. Mercury also rules over your 11th house of friends. So this might even be changing up friendships related to work and career, or making new friends with work and career. But I think as Mercury goes retrograde in your 10th house, there is this review and this reflection on your work and on your career. And that might bring some problems, but then Jupiter is going to be going into your 10th house, where this is going to be expanding your career, expanding opportunities within your workplace, maybe taking on more work, maybe taking on another job, maybe starting your own business. So this Mercury retrograde is just reorienting yourself and reorganizing your work in order to make room for more. Virgo, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 9th house. The 9th house rules things like spirituality, religion, astrology, higher education like colleges. It also rules far distance traveling. It rules publishing, broadcasting, social media. And this one is really important for you guys because you're a Virgo rising. Mercury rules your 1st house and it rules you. So whatever Mercury's doing essentially is kind of what you're doing. And there's going to be this rethinking, or this reorganizing, or this reviewing your 9th house of your beliefs, of your worldview, or maybe there's a delay in the travel plans that you have if they're far distance travel plans. Maybe if you're in school, like a college, there might be this kind of delay or this like shift in your major or something like that. Mercury rules your 10th house of career as well. So if your work has anything to do with publishing, broadcasting, social media, as well as politics or law, there will be this kind of delay or this, reorganization or this review in this area of your life. But this is all good because Jupiter, after you kind of reorganize yourself here, Jupiter is going to be going into your 9th house, where there'll be this expansion of and these opportunities and this like kind of abundance when it comes to higher education, spirituality, astrology, far distance travel, foreign languages, all of that kind of good stuff. So this is kind of just reorienting your mind and reorienting your like belief system in order to have it kind of expand later on. Libra, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 8th house. The 8th house isn't the funnest house, but the 8th house rules death, other people's money, shared resources, inheritance, debt. It rules secrets. And so as Mercury's retrograding through here, there's going to be this kind of reorganization of like maybe your debt, or if you're in a really committed relationship, your partner might have some money issues, or there might need to be this reorganization between your partner's money and your money. But a lot of this is just like reorganizing, reviewing, reflecting, and maybe putting out some fires related to your 8th house of, death. Maybe you're taking care of a loved one who's like kind of at the edge there, or maybe you have like an inheritance you're working through, or maybe you have some debt that you're working through. The other thing is, with this being your 8th house of other people's money, maybe more people have been giving you things. There needs to be this kind of reorganization of, how much people give you versus what do you take, sort of thing. But what's nice about this is like once you kind of reorganize this area, Jupiter comes into your 8th house and there's this expansion, there's this abundance related to other people's money and shared resources. And, if you're in a committed relationship, maybe your partner's kind of struggling with money because because they're looking for a job, and then like there's this reorganization of how you spend things, and then all of a sudden they get a job and money's really good for them. That's how I would kind of look at this. The eighth house also rules like the occult and like darker things. So this might be reimagining or reworking or, rethinking like your own fears or like things that you're not really like, too keen on when it comes to the world, like getting over yourself and getting over your fears and things like that. Scorpio, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 7th house, so it's super easy. A miscommunication in relationships, a delay in relationships, a change of plan in relationships, rethinking relationships, reviewing relationships. There's a lot going on in your 7th house right now of relationships, so it's really all about relationships. But this Mercury retrograde is going to be some kind of a delay, some kind of a miscommunication or a rethinking of something. And then Jupiter ingresses into your 7th house, where all of a sudden there's all of this abundance, there's all of this hope, there's all of this space, and Jupiter is going to be expanding your 7th house of relationships. So that's all really good. Like, I just think this Mercury retrograde is just like, hey, you're going to be rethinking and reviewing your partner. There might be this like communication that needs to happen that might be like hard to deal with, but then all of a sudden, once that's dealt with, Jupiter comes in and the relationship is even better. Or if you're single, this is a pretty good indicator that there's going to be some relationship stuff happening for you in the very near future. Sagittarius, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 6th house of work, health, day-to-day activities, employment, co-workers, employees, as well as pets. And so as Mercury is going to be retrograding here, what's important is Mercury also rules your whole sign 10th house of career. So this might be like the 10th house is like the title that you wear in the world, and the 6th house is like the work that goes into it. You know what I mean? And so as Mercury retrogrades here, this might be changing your schedule, a miscommunication with a coworker or an employee. This might be, reviewing your health and your diet and what can you do to change it and what can you do to, make it work better for you. I think a lot of this is really on health and body things, as well as, it is going to deal with work. It is going to deal with career, but much more like with your schedule with work, or like, how much time do you have to put into the labor that you do things? How can you make things more efficient? How can you make things more, stable and secure? But then right after that, Jupiter goes into your 6th house, where Jupiter is your ruling planet. So whatever Jupiter is doing is really important. And it's going to be transiting your 6th house of work and labor and health and routine. And so there's going to be this expansion of all of these things where, you might be going to the gym more. You might be, like focusing on your diet. You might be increasing your workload. And again, that's maybe what this Mercury retrograde is about, is like reorganizing your schedule so you can increase your workload. Also, something to do with pets. Maybe there's like a problem with your pet or something like that. Capricorn, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, arts, music, creativity, recreation, self-expression. It also rules children. So if you have any kids, this one's going to be important. Mercury is going to be retrograding in this area where you're going to be reorganizing yourself around, love, romance, maybe rethinking the way that you love, maybe rethinking your connection with your partner, maybe reviewing, how do you express yourself, maybe, having some delays within that, and also delays in like any art or music or recreation that you pursue. This will be a rethinking of this time. This will be a re-strategizing of this area. And then Jupiter ingresses into your 5th house, where there's this expansion of love and romance, expansion with children. So if you don't want to get pregnant or don't want to have a kid, this is a very opportune time to have one of those. But Jupiter here is going to be expanding art, art, music, recreation. And so there's a big look at like pretty much what do you want? And there's like this reorganization of like, what do you want in love and romance? What do you want in sex? And, maybe there's some miscommunications with your children, or maybe miscommunications related to, how you speak or talk to your partner. Aquarius, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 4th house of home, family, living situation. So this is a big time to rethink and review and reflect on your living situation or your family, like your parents. So this might be a miscommunication with one of your parents. This might be a problem in the house. Maybe there's an electrical issue, or maybe there's some kind of a delay in some kind of construction project that you wanted to do. Either way, this is a big rethinking and reviewing of your living situation, home, and parents. And then once all of that's done and Jupiter ingresses into your 4th house, there's all of this expansion with this area. So maybe it's like, maybe you're getting ready to move and you need to get all of your shit together. And then while you're doing that, there's some sort of delay. But then all of that gets worked out. And then by like May and June, Jupiter enters your 4th house, and maybe you move to a bigger place, or you expand your home and your family, something along those lines. Pisces, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 3rd house. The third house is kind of like the junk drawer of the chart. It kind of rules a lot of different things, but it rules siblings, it rules neighbors, it rules cousins, aunts, uncles. So pay attention to that area. It rules like your local community. So not like the city, but like the blocks that you live in, the neighborhood that you live in. It rules short distance travel. It rules writing and communication. And I think that's much more important because this is a Mercury retrograde in this area. And so, as Mercury retrogrades in your third house, this might be, well, the other thing I like to say about the third house is that it's really like, how do you utilize the knowledge that you have? It also rules schedule. It's not like the sixth house where it's much more like habits and routine. The third house is much more of like, how do you spend what do you spend your free time doing? Like, how do you organize running your errands and things like that? But like, how do you utilize the knowledge that you have? How do you apply it into your life? And so I think this Mercury retrograde is a big time to really rethink and review and reorganize. How do you spend your time? How do you communicate? How do you communicate with your neighbors or with your siblings or your extended family? Maybe changing the way that you write or changing the way that you speak to other people. Maybe this might be a problem with your car or a problem with short distance traveling, or at least at the minimum, a delay with short distance traveling. But then afterwards, Jupiter, which is your ruling planet, ingresses into Taurus, and there's all of this expansion with, again, like neighbors, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, short distance traveling. So it's like just a tiny bit of a delay, a tiny bit of a miscommunication, a tiny bit of a problem, and then things really expand in this area, and there's a lot of good things going on in this area for you.